All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 8th, 2022 meeting of SIG-AUTH. Can everybody see my screen and hear me? I assume yes.
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen.
You cannot?
Well, we can.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. So let's get started. Looks like we can hop right to discussion topics. So the first thing on the agenda is SIG-AUTH endorsement of PSP migrator. Who wants to lead this discussion?
I am happy to introduce the topic. Yeah, this was from a mailing list email, if you saw that. So actually, let me grab a link to the PSP migration docs. So this is a guide that I wrote up for, oh yeah, thanks. This is a guide that I wrote up for migrating from pod security policies to new pod security admission. And the big gotcha here is for mutation. Basically, if you have mutating pod security policies, then it's not safe to just turn off pod security policy. You know, security issues of that aside, you might have pods straight up break if they're depending on those default values being set. And we don't have a good way of detecting this. If you scroll down to, let's see, eliminate purely mutating fields, 2A. It's a pretty manual process that basically comes down to look at your pod templates, look at your pods, see if anything changed. If it did, go and fix it. And so something that Sam and I have been talking about is a way of automating this, this process, and especially some of these like detecting mutation and dealing with some of the like gnarlier corner cases of this to help ease the transition from pod security policy. So Sam ran with this and wrote up a great little tool to help automate a lot of this. With that, Sam, are you up for the demo or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can do it. Actually, doing pretty well today. So happy to go through that.
Yeah, let me share host with you.
Yeah, I think the other. Okay.
You should be able to present if you
Okay.
would like to do a demo.
Let's see if it's actually gonna. I'm using the browser version of Zoom. Let's see, show work. There you go. So there's two parts to the tool. Really, one is detecting whether your PSP is mutating, which is something you should fix, and the other is how do we recommend a suggested pod security profile, pod security standard for each namespace, because the users also need to decide which am I going to apply baseline, restricted, or privileged to all my namespaces. So the tool actually goes through all namespaces, checks at the running pods, and sees what is the most secure profile that I could apply to the namespace based on the running pods. So that's the other part that's to help make it easier to migrate off of PSP. So yeah, I can. The demo I will show is there's a mutating PSP, and I'm gonna show that the tool correctly detects that, and I'm also gonna fix it, and then I'm gonna run the migrate command so it can actually apply the label based on the suggested pod security standard. So Yeah. So this is the PSP profile that I'm using for this demo. Actually, can you see my? Yeah, you can see my screen. It should be working. Yeah, you see my terminal, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is the pod security profile. It's fairly standard in basically everything, but the only thing that's really that you should pay attention to is the default add capabilities, because this attribute will add the security context to a pod if it's not added yet. So that's why it's a mutating attribute of the PSP. When we go to the I'm going to deploy my Nginx pod, and I commented out this part because it's going to be added by the PSP. So later we will uncomment it to fix it. That's no longer mutating. But for now, we're just going to apply it like this. Very quick. Yeah, it's already running. It's already loaded the image. And then next, we're going to run the PSP migrator to. There are a few commands, but I think the key ones we're going to use for now is this mutating pods to get a list of all the pods in your cluster and for namespace. And then there's an attribute called mutated. And the reason it's mutated is because of default add capabilities PSP. Actually, for the other command that we have right now in PSP migrate is migrate, and that will go through all your namespaces, but it will also check if there's a mutating pod. And if there is, it tells you to first fix that, because there's a risk that if you don't fix that the security attributes that you were expecting on your pod suddenly are gone after you move to PSA. So that's why the mutating piece is critical to be fixed first. Now it was going to go through all the pods in the cluster, and then it showed that this pod is mutated. There's a comment as well to get more details of how this is being mutated, which will allow you to get the right information. And that will show us that it is the default add capabilities. And this is, I got to find a way how to make this more user-friendly, but basically this is showing the pod has a nil slice, and then the parent deployment spec has a v1 security context. That's how we do the naive detection. Actually, that's one of the feedback points that I think going forward, I would like someone to review whether there are the edge cases that this won't catch. So now I know that my PSP profile has this mutating field. So what should I do? I should modify my deployment. I should make sure that my deployment has these fields added already, so the PSP is no longer mutating. So I'm just gonna reapply this. Now you see it's mutating as false, and now the migration should actually be able to continue because there's no more mutating pods in the cluster. And then what you see now is it's gonna check the pods in the namespace default, and it's gonna suggest a specific pod security standard. And the way it does it is it actually goes through all the pods. It first tries baseline. If baseline works, then if baseline would work for all the pods, it actually starts with restricted. If restricted works for all the pods, it would recommend restricted. Then goes to baseline, and then goes to privileged. And then the question the user gets is, what do you want to do? Do you want to enforce it or just put it in audit mode? I'm going to put enforce, and then it will apply the label on the namespace, and you can verify here that it does add the labels, and that should have you ready for disabling PSP. So the end goal of this is after they run through this too, the end user should be able to disable PSP and fully move away from it. The migrate command will actually go through every single namespace. It is a loop over every single namespace in the cluster, and will try to apply a pod security standard on every single namespace. Yeah. Any questions? This is all I have for the demo.
So I guess there are some trivial PSPs that can be migrated. What classes of PSPs are challenging? Is it only these PSPs with defaulting, or are there others classes as well?
I think
okay.
one of the challenging things here is that a lot of the pods, there's not a clean separation of defaulting and validating fields in pod security policy. So like, in the case of default add capabilities, that's clearly a mutating one. But actually required, maybe that one's not an example of it, but blanking on the list off the top of my head, but there's a handful that are both mutating and validating. And actually, if you want to have a pod security policy that conforms to the restricted pod security standards, then it has to, by necessity, have mutating fields on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think allow privilege escalation is one of those. If you say allow privilege escalation false, that's actually going to set the default.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think the other comment, Mike, I had is if users have like 30 namespaces, they still got to go through this very on a one-by-one basis. This tool makes it much smoother for these users to easily enable PSA for 30 namespaces. I think that's really the it instead of there's many users that I've worked with that don't really want to get all into the nitty-gritty details of PSP and PSA, but they do want to be able to enable it in a very easy and consistent manner across all their namespaces. So I think that's the other.
Yeah, I totally see the value for kind of like the trivial stuff where like a human, it would take a very long time for them to figure out what profile is required. That seems very valuable. Yeah, I guess there I was mostly interested in like situations where the administrator would have to think a little bit more, like the situations where we don't get the audit enforce prompt.
Yeah, I think the way I would put it, that's a very, actually, I did the audience would be not the super sophisticated users. The super sophisticated users, I don't think would be using this tool. They would be very much doing this in their own way. But this is more for I would say the 80% user base that doesn't use OPA, that doesn't use all the advanced, that doesn't know Kubernetes as well. They want to, yeah. I think I'm sure there's going to be edge cases for the more advanced users. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say if a user is already using PSP, they're probably fairly far along, but I actually don't know.
Yeah, I think someone on the Google side did check, and we have many users that have enabled PSP, but they're not really using it as well. So yeah, I think,
yeah.
But you're right. Like I think in general, people that use PSP, they I mean, it's not an easy feature, so you have to to get it working. Exactly. It's not that easy. So yeah.
So I guess the question for SIG-AUTH community is, does this seem useful, and does this seem like something that we would want to endorse as a Kubernetes SIGs repo? Like one important note about this is it's sort of limited lifetime. Limited lifespan. Like it's not something that we would be committing to maintaining indefinitely. Probably once, I think once 124 drops out of support window or something like that, we could probably archive it.
Yeah, I'm pro adding this as a subproject. This seems like very similar to what we did for the client Go context migration tooling, which we put it up there. People used it, found it valuable, and forgot about it.
Any non-Googlers think this is a good idea?
I think that's a good idea. Also, definitely we should add like a warning to when this is going to be deprecated after which release. I think it'd be good to signal that when it's added to the repo, added to the org.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think one question we might get is, is this production ready?
Never. Nothing is ever production ready, right? I think we should put some like this is for. I think Mikey brought it up. Like, is this gonna we should have some language like this is might not fit all cases or something along the lines. Like I do believe that this is gonna be for majority, but it's not necessarily gonna be for every single user that is gonna work fine. Like I think that will be very hard to write a tool like that. So yeah. I think what would be so I've only tested it on GKE because that's what I have around. What I think would be helpful is what other distros have PSP heavily enabled, and how do we test it on there, and if there are other quirks that might be different in the way PSP is handled, or if we test this only on GKE, should it be enough? I don't know the answer to that.
It would definitely be good to test on other distributions, but I don't think that's a hard requirement. There's nothing non-vanilla about GKE's usage of PSP. I know that OpenShift uses PSP pretty heavily. So it might be good to get someone from that project to take a look at it. Just going back to, can't remember who brought up the point of it being production ready, but I think two recommendations I have there. One is to make sure we document the limitations of this. So like, for instance, the detecting of mutation is heuristic. I think if I remember correctly from the implementation, it's not going to work for pods that aren't created by controllers. And it will also run into errors if you have, or issues if you have non-PSP mutations happening. So there are some kind of like edge cases that would be good to document. And then also, when it comes to the actual tool running, I think erring on the side of caution and being a little verbose about warnings and just kind of failing and refusing to apply the mutations to the cluster when it gets risky.
Are you saying that it does that already, or is that something that needs to be implemented?
It looks like it's already doing some of that, but maybe something to kind of like keep in mind as we're developing it further.
Okay.
So I guess in conclusion, Mike and Rita, if you wouldn't mind adding a +1 to that issue to create the repo, that would be helpful.
All right.
Thanks.
Will do.
Awesome. I think that does that wrap it up for this topic? Let's hop over to, all right, let's hop over to the KMS cap. Rita, do you want to present, or would you rather have me present?
Either way is fine. I think we only have like maybe 2 things that we need to discuss, but otherwise, like all your comments make sense.
Okay. If you present,
Okay.
I'll take notes, or you can take
Sure.
notes.
Can you make me host? Thanks.
Yeah.
I did not log in as, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I think first one was your questions around, wait, where did it go? The UID one. Did I close that or?
Yeah, I think
anyway,
it's all the way at the top, actually. If you scroll a little bit more. Like it was one of the old comments.
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I usually see, and maybe other people can weigh in, is like for stuff like request ID, like audit ID, we pass those in side channels, like in request headers, and generally don't embed them in the request objects. I think it is less important here than in like a Kubernetes API, because this is not a declarative API. But yeah, so go ahead. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think the reason we added it here, so we also had a previous gap that got merged as part of the enhancement for 124. So we did add UID as part of Proto there. The only thing was maybe when we provide a reference implementation, users can access this UID by just calling get UID function rather than having to go through the Proto metadata and then parse through the different headers that are available there. So like we were just thinking if it's available here, it's just more straightforward and accessible for the users.
Right, and then the downside of that is you have to add UID to every single request object that you create. So for something that you want to like, a functionality that you want to have across like the entire server, the consistent side channel is useful. Like for example, a similar thing would be an access token if this API accepted access tokens. If you put that in the request body, which you totally could, you'd have to put it in all request bodies. It's not like a, you know, in aspect or like a horizontal aspect of the API. But I don't really care that much. If there is a preference to do this here, I think both are fairly easy to access. So, but if there's a preference to do this here, I like won't block the PR on this. I will let you say yes or no, and then resolve the comment. And
okay.
Yeah, I defer to you.
Okay, cool. Let us discuss with other folks
Sure.
as well. We don't want to just make this decision here. Thank you. And I think the next one is this. Yeah, and initialize. Since you
Yeah.
wrote the comment.
Yeah, so for the magic number, I think the default one today is just the K8S0. And then for this one, we have added, I think, like, so Mo proposed adding EK8S0. But I was just wondering, in addition to this, do you think there might be conflict because you said there are chances of it? Should we add more bytes?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I would be worried about this. So the serializers that we have will, what's it called? We have this thing called a recognizer, which like first decodes in JSON, then decodes in Proto or something. I would be worried about recognizer being able to interpret that as something. I think it's probably fine, but maybe, yeah, I think the one thing that would be weird is if somehow E was the exact tag for like a proto byte array or the beginning of a proto message. We can verify that. It is a good point that the current magic number is not very random either.
Yeah.
Well, I guess like I get your point about like clobbering, but where do you foresee that? Like I don't see anything else using this, right?
Well, the problem would be if like this is a valid, if we if this is a valid, if this could deserialize as a proto somehow, which it probably can't, but like if it could, then maybe we would recognize that as a proto, and like that would probably panic or cause a 500 or something, which would like break a list operation.
You can, so like, isn't the first byte in a proto object the tag number of the first field, and you can choose an arbitrary tag number?
But it's ANDed with the type, I think. So it would be tag number ANDed for the lower 6 bits, and then the type is the top. I can't remember. I think E is the only thing that matters. And is it valid base 64? No, because of the 0. Let me check E. I can check that offline. And if that doesn't deserialize as a proto, then I think we're fine.
Okay.
Tahir, do you know anything that I don't?
I mean, the last time I looked at this, I thought like the magic number was essentially framing and it was always there. Are there cases where the magic number is not there and we try to just rawly deserialize this?
Yeah, I think for unencoded for unencrypted objects. So
okay,
that would be weird in a situation that could be confusing in some situations, especially around like removing or adding encryption. So to like an existing object type or something. Yeah, I'll double check this one offline. But I think both of these are super minor. Were those the only ones that are still open?
I mean, everything that's close has been addressed, but these haven't been addressed, but we agree.
Okay, cool. Then those last two are fairly simple. I'll tackle the second one if you tackle the first one
Okay.
and come up with a recommendation. And yeah, other than that, I think I will LGTM it.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for reviewing and making all the suggestions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. First issue, UID. Mark these defers to kept authors. Second issue, magic number. Mike Denise to follow up. Awesome. Other than that, kept is LGTM. All right. Trust anchor sets to here. Would you like to present?
Sure.
Just a second. Unfortunately, Mo isn't here. If you're talking, you are muted.
When I share my tab, I lose the ability to speak.
All right. Do you want me to share then?
Okay, did that work? All right. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Now I can't hear you guys. Great. Give me 1 second. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And can you now see the tab with VCAP in it? The comments?
Yes.
Okay. I think this happened last meeting too. If you try to share, somebody tried to share a single Chrome tab and that knocks out their audio. Okay, so one of the open questions is, should we have some verification functionality built into the trust anchor set object? Either as a CRL or as a OCSP URL. Personally, I kind of lean away from this because it's like we're just making up a standard here. So like users are going to have to write some custom code to load a CRL or an OCSP URL and wire it into their TLS library. And if we're having them write custom code, they may as well write custom code that extracts this information from the root certificate as an X509 extension. but
aren't there already standard extensions for URLs to CRLs in
not
X509?
not a URL to, I think, to an OCSP, right?
I thought they had it for CRLs too,
Okay.
embedded in a CA.
I believe there are. I don't know the status. Like, my impression is that, like, if you just pull OpenSSL off the shelf or Golang's TLS library, it's not gonna like interpret any of those.
It won't for sure, but there are standard ways to distribute like the location of a CRL in a CA. CRL distribution point. CRL distribution point. I think it's an X59 extension. So my preference for both CRL and OCSP is if there are X509 extensions that we can add to the CA X509 certificate, then we should add those there versus adding the fields, adding CRLs directly in trusting cassette.
Yeah, I definitely, so if we do have some revocation functionality in trusting cassette, it should not be a CRL directly, I think, because those can get arbitrarily large. And I think in a Kubernetes deployment, right, they would get arbitrarily large because probably each pod you're using has an independent key and certificate. And whatever compromise leads you to revoke the certificates would lead you to revoke a lot of certificates. Okay. Are there any differing opinions? Mo, obviously. But is there someone on the call? Okay.
I guess I'll just chime in and say my understanding is that the CRL distribution point is something that you put in the certificate so that when you show up with the certificate, the entity authorizing that goes somewhere else to go see if your certificate has been revoked. So you're kind of just pushing the problem off to somewhere else to say there will be a CRL server somewhere. That thing will
pushing it
deliver
off to the CA, right?
What?
We're pushing it off to the
legally
CA.
it's an endpoint on the CA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Another proposed. So there were some good comments around like, hey, let's fill out the alternatives section, talk about why we don't want to use a CSI driver and a custom resource. So I kind of expanded on those. There was a recommendation to add SIG security as a participating SIG. Am I still presenting or no, I'm not? Okay, there we go.
SIG security has never been involved in the certificate subproject, which is a SIG-AUTH subproject. I don't know why they would become involved in it now. Is anybody from SIG security here? If they don't participate in it, I would say leave them off the participating SIGs.
Okay. There's also two related feedback that we should take aspects of this to SIG architecture. One is we decided, hey, we should have a sort of canonical mapping convention between the URL based signer name and the Kubernetes resource name for a trust anchor sets object. And that's like the first time we have something like that. So we should ask SIG architecture about it. And
Yeah, that sounds
additionally,
like a good idea to ask SIG-Arch about that. I was about to say I don't know if I've seen those conventions in Kubernetes before.
What is the issue?
so basically,
Oh, the dash dash.
yeah, we want the trust anchor. So okay, another comment was, hey, maybe rename this to something like cluster trust anchor sets. That seemed like a good idea. So I renamed it to cluster trust anchor config. So it's not plural and it's clearly cluster scoped. But like a signer name is not a valid Kubernetes resource name. Slashes are not allowed, and well, slashes are the problem. Dots are allowed, but not slashes. So I came up with a sort of escape convention that sort of one-to-one maps between signer names and resource names, but it's ugly. But I can't think of a better one.
Config is a cop-out. I like the endpoint sets. We have plural resource names. Or, sorry, trust anchor sets. We have plural resource names.
Trust anchor sets is...
I would trust anchors.
Well, so the problem is it is literally a object that contains multiple independent sets of trust anchors.
How about trust anchor bundle?
That's just the same as config.
No, it isn't. Config is catch-all for everything. Bundle has relevance within this usage, which is a certificate bundle.
Okay, cluster trust anchor bundle. All right.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the other alternative is having like, you know, trust anchor set as the resource, and whatever consumes it, you can provide a list of references to.
Yeah, so that was actually one of SF Tim's, and I don't know if he's on the call or not, but it was one of his recommendations for exploring is, hey, have this be trust anchor set singular, have it store a single set, and then use label selectors to do the association between signers and trust anchor set objects. I think that is elegant, but not necessarily workable in this case, because we want to be able to easily lock down, like a given signer's controller should only be able to update the trust anchor set objects that are related to that signer. And the only hook RBAC gives us to do that is names. You can't use label selectors in RBAC. So you have to have a defined, like, given a signer, you have to know the fixed set of trust anchor set singular objects that you want to use. The names of them.
But you also would want to support create, right? For like initial deployment of one of these things.
Yes.
So you're still out of luck because you don't have resource name for create in RBAC.
I guess the way I was thinking about it is like the controller doesn't necessarily, like, so let me use an analogy to the system we already have, like inside GKE. There we sort of deploy our, I forget what we call it, workload, trust anchor config or something like that. We just deploy that object out of band into the cluster using our existing deployment machinery, and then the controller kind of takes over it and you know, works on it. I think we can't like, do you have a good idea of like, if we want controllers to be able to create these objects, it seems like we are totally out of luck, right? Because any controller will be able to create a trust anchor set that represents itself as being associated with a different signer.
Yeah, I mean, so we solved this with the certificates API using the admission control and doing extra checks there. I will need to think about it, but the naming problem here, this highlighted comment, is pretty gross. I would say maybe add a signer field explicitly, and we'll check an additional RBAC permission during admission.
That was my original proposal, and I guess told me to change it.
Who told you to change it?
Last time we discussed this at SIG-AUTH.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I guess
originally I was doing it like cluster. I was doing it like certificate signing requests, where you put the signer name as a field and do some janky RBAC integration.
So,
but it was pointed out that that doesn't work for reads.
What is the point of? Do we care about reads?
I don't think so, because using the kubelet kubelet volume, anyone will be able to read any trust anchor set.
So, what is the point of having a signer name? Is the only point of having a signer name somehow in this object so that signers can update their own trust anchor sets?
And so that when you use the kubelet volume to mount a trust anchor set or bundle or whatever the heck we call it into a pod, I would like you to have the ability to specify then the nice signer name that you want the trust anchors for, rather than having to know about this whatever stupid convention we decide for actually naming the objects. So you should say like, hey, I want to mount a certificate. I want to mount the root trust sets for root trust anchors for example.com/mysigner.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you put in the certificate signing requests and everything else.
Right. Let me think. I'll think about that. I'm not sure.
Okay. There's an additional comment, like why PIM wrapped. He suggests base 64 encoded dir, like in the Juke specification. I don't really care one way or another. I think if you're like handling certificates, you're more likely to already have the certificate in PIM format. But yeah, I mean, PIM is base 64 wrapped dir. It's just got that extra framing lines.
Yeah, and it also allows for like additional comments and stuff between blocks.
Well, we explicitly constrain it so that you can only have one block in this entry. So like, yeah, we want you to, I mean, that's just an arbitrary choice we made, right? Like we could just have this PIM trust anchors field be a single string and say, hey, use the PIM's bundle ability. To be honest, I think we just copied this from GK Spiffy without like putting too much thought into it.
So the only value of having PIM for the certificates API is that we can encode extra blocks and extra info in the CSR, in the CSRs as they exist in the Kubernetes API. Otherwise, I would say dir would be better if we were constrained to only one, because it is the canonical representation. So I'd have a byte where byte field would just dir encoded.
Not even base 64. So the problem is like dir is awful to work with. It's binary data.
Go automatically uses base 64 for
Sure.
YAML and so we don't want to double base 64 it. And yeah, I don't like the config map string, but dir you have to work with because you go from PEM to dir and then.
Yeah, but in the case where someone is manually, like, I don't know, maybe they don't have a controller.
But
right?
you're
Like,
saying
you
that
go-
nobody's manually, right? Because you're saying that like this is all about. All right, go ahead.
It just seems like if you go to VeriSign or whoever, like in the dark ages, and you buy a certificate, right? It comes as a PEM thing. And if a system wants you to get that into binary dir to paste it somewhere, that's going to be super painful.
Why aren't we just having a concatenated list of PEMs? Why are we breaking them up? What is your motivation for that?
I don't think there's a strong motivation. I think we wanted to like sort them maybe, or I don't remember, but like anything that we do there we could do with, you know, a single string that contains PEMs. Base 64 encoded PEMs. Do you think that would be better? Just have a big string that contains a PEM bundle, and we do some validation on the contents of the PEM bundle.
Yeah, I mean, so like what do things normally do when they see non-PEM blocks or comments in lists of PEM blocks? They usually skip them, right?
I didn't know. I didn't know you could put comments in between the blocks.
But all sorts of stuff in PEM. Let me think about it. So I think next, does anybody know when the feature freeze is for 125? Is it the 16th?
That's, yeah, I think Rita said that's what it was.
Yeah. Do we want to add this to the KEP tracking sheet? And I recently learned how to do that.
I don't know how to do that. So what do you think, Tahir? Do you think it seems like there's still a fair amount that's open, but I think we could get the reviews done. Mo gets back Monday, I think.
I think we can try. What does that commit us to having the implement, like a working alpha implementation done by 125 release time, like the freeze, or?
That would be ideal, yeah.
Okay.
Let's evaluate and then know by Monday whether we think we can get this done.
Okay.
And then by then, Mo will be back, and maybe we can grab him. And maybe anybody else who is interested in commenting on the KEP. We'll have a group chat on Slack or something.
Yeah, and may I request that the KEP owner drives this so that SIG-AUTH leads can help with tracking the KEP.
Sure.
That would be great.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think we are almost out of time, so I'm going to end the recording.